is the Bottom Dead Center Show, presented by OSMT.
Hey, welcome back to the Bottom Dead Center Show here exclusively on the Old School Monster Trucks YouTube channel, perhaps to our detriment, Frank Krimmel Jr., but we refuse to put our silly brand of entertainment on any kind of podcast platform or anything like that. Like we always say, it's a goddamn show, so it's going to have to stay here on YouTube. But we got a casual show, put together for this episode, Frank, where you and me just kind of hanging out, shooting the breeze. And I tell you what, you people are going to have a good time tonight, I think, though, because we have a lot of killer footage we're going to be dropping in to illustrate our chosen topic tonight, Frank. But I always get the pleasure of introducing the topic, but I think you should tonight, Frank. Tell the people, what are we talking about this evening?
USA Motorsports.
Yes, that's right. It's almost kind of been the theme of the season. We've had a couple, spots where we veered off, like the Mike Reck interview and the Davenport show on Medium Raw, but really we've been hitting the USA thing, pretty hot and heavy this season, which is a selfish pick for me, being a Kansas City native, and that's where USA was based. But I think you'll agree with me, Frank. USA has a pretty special place in all of our hearts just for how they really did march to the beat of their own drum, but it was a damn good beat, wasn't it?
Oh, especially for guys like, our age. That was the late 80s, early 90s was a huge time for monster trucks. And that's when we were growing up and trying to, figure out and trying to pay attention to monster trucks. So for us, man, the USA era and what USA morphed into, but, this is more about what USA was.
Yeah.
It's outstanding. Really.
We kind of covered it when we had legendary USA announcer Dave Bennett on the show a few weeks ago. Some of the genesis of USA. That's where I kind of want to start tonight. Kind of a conglomerate of, 3 or 4 pretty notable entertainment businessmen, primarily in Missouri, Kansas City, and St. Louis. Obviously, Russ Klein's the name that we touch on the most, but you've got, Steve Shankman and Irv Zuckerman, and all these guys had a background in some kind of live entertainment. The cats more from the St. Louis side, like, Irv and I think Steve, they had their hands in concert promoting and things like that, and they later sold, their concert promotion properties for big time bucks to, I think it was SFX or it might have been Live Nation at the time when they sold that. But focusing more on Russ Klein. So Russ was kind of, I feel like he was more the engine behind a lot of what USA tried to do, because as we detailed with Dave, he was working for the Kansas City Chiefs as sort of like in a venue, let's say venue management or entertainment management position with the Chiefs in their Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City. So of course he was instrumental in bringing, before we even called it USA Motorsports, before we called it the, Grand National Motor Spectacular or the Coors Extra Gold Motor Spectacular. They started off at Arrowhead with a mud bogging event, usually mixed in with like some demolition derby or something for some color, called Mudathon. I assume that's a play on marathon, but you look at some of those early shows, Frank, and I mean, that's an open air stadium dirt show with an above ground mud pit in the early 80s. That's pretty, I don't want to say ahead of its time, but I mean, it was pioneering, I think.
It really was. And a lot of stuff USA did in the early days was pretty sweet. I mean, the way they had a lot of trucks too for back then. US Hot Rod was doing their thing, but man, USA it was always different trucks too. I mean, you get your Bigfoot, your Tauruses, and your Barefoots in there, but man, they had a whole different group of trucks that you only saw at USA shows. So definitely, like you said, what they were doing, they were pioneering a certain angle of the sport for sure.
So I've seen documents and even in some of their like their tour programs and things like that they pioneered the development of the above ground mud pit in stadiums and arenas. And it was their crew that had, the sort of the layout and the ideas of how to build this mud pit indoors, so to speak, or in a stadium and keep it from running out everywhere or ruining the floor underneath, even going so far at some venues to actually put steel plate down as the bedrock, let's say, underneath, the above ground mud pit. And I can certainly tell you, from a fan's point of view, let's say, now I'd have to find somebody that raced mud bog trucks or unlimited mud dragsters or something to tell me who made the best mud. But I will say
Yeah,
USA's mud pits always looked beautiful, if you can say that about a mud pit.
they
And I
did.
can tell you from being at so many of their shows as a kid, and I think probably the two that stand out the most to me are the Kemper Arena shows in Kansas City and the Denver Coliseum shows in Denver. But you would walk in as a kid, and this is one of Matt Stoltz and I's favorite words, the vomitorium, which is not the place you go to puke when you get
Oh,
sick at the gig. It's the hallway that filters you from the concourse out into the seating areas. But you walk through the VOMs, and it's before the show, and you gaze out on the floor, and you're an excited young kid, and you don't know what trucks are going to be there necessarily, and so
right.
you're like, which monster truck's here? And of course, any good promoter with their salt doesn't have the trucks parked on the floor already. Those suckers are tucked out outside or in the tunnel, or so you're already like, oh man, I can't wait to see. And you see the crush cars and you see the jumps for the quads, but then you see that big, whatever 60, 70, 80 foot mud pit in the middle of the arena. And if you can like properly groom and shape a mud pit, man, USA knew how to do that, man. And they were always big about talking about how their mud pits were always perfectly the consistency of freshly poured concrete. Uh, and to me, that's our stamp of quality. You know what I mean? Like that was their thing.
Yeah, there was never too much water, never too much mud. It was like the mid level
Yep.
of what you're looking for. Because you could, I mean, back in the day, the US Hot Rod stuff, those pits were different everywhere they went. But with the USA stuff, you see a lot of their, well, the Monster Truck bloopers and Monster Trucks USA, all that stuff that the videos that USA put out. You can see they're very consistent.
I think that it has to come somewhat from the leadership of USA from day one, is those guys realized and recognized that, repeatable, consistent experiences for the fans and also for the venues, being able to tell these potential venues or showcase to the venues that have booked USA that, we bring a consistent product time after time, year after year. You don't have a flop one year and a killer show the next and then a meh show after that, like trying to bring something consistent. And I think from a competition standpoint, getting buy-in from your competitors that you're booking, right? Like, sure, you're paying the monster trucks cash up front to come, run the show. Essentially, you're booking them, but your mud drag guys, they're working towards like a points payout type deal. So you want them to feel like wherever they go, even if the pit length maybe changes a little bit based on venue size, that the USA crew is going to be delivering them a consistent type of pit to run in. And to your point, I think a lot of those US hot rod shows were kind of spotty. Like you'd have a really buttoned up, clean looking, good track and good pit at one gig, and then the next week you watch on TV, and I mean the cars are haphazardly placed and moving around, and the ends of the
Yeah,
pit aren't shaped really nice or smooth, so the transition from concrete to dirt is tough on the monsters, and the pit looks almost like rocky, like it gets so just gnarly and rutted out that the ruts aren't filling themselves back in, and then you get some really crappy passes through the mud. So I don't think it's unfair to maybe presume based on what we can put together that USA's game might have caused US Hot Rod to have to step theirs up in places.
oh for sure. And you probably noticed over the years watching the US Hot Rod stuff too that your pits at some points are very narrow, and then when they put the deal, what they had the banners, the camel banners, the guys couldn't go through them. It's like
Yeah.
they were really, really putting the heat on guys to stop. So you got to figure, I've never raced a mud car, but you got to figure if you got to shoot through this thing as fast as you can and then stop before this banner. I mean, that's putting a lot of stress on the kind of pass you're going to make because you're more worried about stopping than anything. And you didn't have that so much in the USA because the pits seemed to be everything seemed to be a little more relaxed. I don't mean in a bad way, but these guys weren't so worried about having to stop at the USA shows.
At least not early on. I think that came to be a thing when things got a bit more competitive towards the end of the
Yeah.
80s. Excuse me, there was a gentleman racing a mud car for USA in the late 80s, early 90s you might have heard of, named Tom Mintz,
Yes.
with Shake Me. I think he brought an elevated level to the competition. Mike
Hmm.
Early with Mud Shark, Ron Pence with Tater, those guys. Uh,
Absolutely.
But yeah, to your point, I mean, I don't think when I'm flashing back now to our Monstery Science Theater 6000 episode on
Yeah.
Monster May or Monster Mania, but the old Silver Eagle, whatever it was called, jet powered mud drag car.
Mhm.
Well, I tell you what, the stands sure as shit didn't stop that thing hardly, so I know the banner wouldn't
Oh,
have.
right, right.
Yeah, so deploy the jet car. There's a fight in the stands. Go break it up. So. But yeah, so you come back, you look at Russ Klein, and actually Russ later, as I understand from my research, Russ actually went on to develop one of the very first, if not the first, professional indoor lacrosse leagues. If I'm recalling my research correctly, kind of post USA, and I seems to be pretty well respected in that realm of sport for the work he did there. I've never heard, but I would like to hear an indoor lacrosse promo cut in the voice of a monster truck. It's the
Yeah.
Coors indoor lacrosse um, long stick spectacular. Like I don't know what you
Yeah.
call it, but it's not a motor spectacular. But so obviously these guys were aggressive. They were pioneers. They were creative. Mud pits are challenging to build, execute, and pull out of these indoor arenas, and that was kind of their bread and butter was so much of that mud stuff. So I think there's a lot of credit to them on that. Moving along a little bit now, you brought up the variety of monster trucks in particular. We'll hone in on that. Bigfoot was not as big of a part at USA shows early on either. I mean, it was the first monster truck ever inside Arrowhead Stadium to crush cars. I'm going to put a caveat on there, Frank, because there are people out there that believe at Mudathon in 81 or 82, when Mud Rat was there on 66s, that it technically was the first monster truck inside Arrowhead. That's a debate we need to have on a future show, is really what is a monster truck, I guess. Anyhow,
Yeah.
it was the first monster truck to crush cars, at least inside Arrowhead Stadium. But, especially as you see on that Monster Mania tape, I mean, Fred and Jack with the two original Barefoot trucks, later Little Barefoot and Taurus, those guys were at the very core of USA's, booking roster for, I mean, pretty much up until the early 90s, let's say 92. And then I really feel like, the Taurus team kind of shifted over more towards the US hot rod side, especially, and so did Barefoot. But you talk about those early days, buddy. I mean, you look at that mud run that the first Barefoot truck makes in Monster Mania. I mean, that's glorious to watch.
It truly is. And that's a core of so many old school monster truck fans' childhood, is watching that. And then how easy Barefoot made it look.
Yeah.
Pretty sweet. And also too, you got to figure, you mentioned Fred and Jack and those guys, but man, there was a whole host of guys that were a big part of that early USA era, like Scott Stevens, Pablo Huffaker, Outlaw 35. Man, there were so many trucks that you saw in that first video. But the core group was Jack Woolman, Fred Schaefer, Scott Stevens, and I mean, that seems to be the core of that early USA booking group. Then Dan Patrick in the later days,
Yeah.
and and then also too got to get in that Kurds sponsorship.
Yeah. Well,
there was
and
a
I
lot of
think
guys involved in that.
I think in that early core, you got to point out, at least in the Midwest shows, Joe Gardner from
Yes,
originally from
Orange.
Iowa and then from Missouri with Gigantic Orange Crush. I mean, that was actually the first truck I saw crush buses at a show in Missouri, even before Taurus, which is pretty wild. Not a lot's really known about that truck. It's nowhere near as notable or well documented necessarily as, of course, Taurus and Barefoot are. But Gigantic Orange Crush was what an interesting truck, and if we can ever track down some of those folks that were, I don't know if Joe's necessarily still around. I know his son has posted on some of the groups in the past on Facebook, but regardless, that truck and its sister truck, which they later built and I think was just called Orange Crush, those two trucks had an eclectic mix of parts underneath them, and they ran the tar out of them. I mean, they ran them hard. And of course, Gigantic, most famous in its configuration with those huge what would you call them? Like 76-inch Firestone, I don't know if they were logger tires or, some kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, great big ass tires. I often think to myself, Frank, how did you handle those things? I mean,
I've thought about that. When I was a kid, I never paid attention to that. But the older I got, I'm like, how would you tire that thing up? Because those aren't going to just stand up,
yeah.
you know?
They
So,
look dangerous as hell. I mean, so for context, for you guys listening out there, so while my driving accomplishments are nowhere near as notable as Frank's, I have one thing on Frank, and that's putting tires on and off Bigfoot 5 and driving it. I think more than Frank. So while I lack all of my World Finals experience that you have, I have done what I believe to be the most dangerous job in monster trucks. Maybe short of taking away a jug of milk from Richie Blackburn, but that. But so anyhow,
yeah.
Bigfoot 5, the wheels, as Jim Kramer explained to me, and I hope I'm remembering correctly, are kind of like a magnesium aluminum alloy. So they're
Mhm.
light but very strong, stronger certainly than just straight up aluminum would be, I guess. And then of course those Firestone Tundra tires on there, and trust me, I'm coming back to Orange Crush and USA with this. Those tires are not nearly as heavy as what they would be if they were for a mining pit truck or something like
Mhm.
that. They're about 2,500 pounds per unit. So when you really think about that, I mean, that's pretty gosh dang light for the size of those things. And the
Mhm.
reason being, of course, they were meant to traverse deep snow and float over it rather than sinking, let's say. So anyhow, handling those tires is still incredibly dangerous, whether you have a forklift or a telehandler or a tow truck on site, like a big wrecker tow truck. That's a dangerous gig doing that kind of stuff. So when you think about however the gardeners or people that ran tires like that, you think about the Dabneys when they had big, skidder or logger tires on Megaforce,
Mhm.
things like that. I mean, those 66s fall over easy enough as it is, as we both know. I can't
Yeah.
imagine the thud of laying over, one of those big heavy tires. It would not surprise me if, those specialty tires, let's call them, that we're talking about with like gigantic Orange Crush. Wouldn't surprise me at all if a wheel and tire off one of those came, within a stone's throw of what one of Bigfoot Five's Tundra tires weighs. Certainly, you know, whatever you want to say, like pound per inch of height or whatever. The ratio at least is
Yeah.
greatly in favor of those. So credit to them, however they handled those frickin' things. Question: have you ever handled a 73 like what Taurus was running and stuff back then by chance?
I have not. My time in the business came in after all that stuff was, well, not, I wouldn't say common,
Yeah.
but after that stuff was gone by the time I got in. But, I see the guys, I see videos of the 73s and all that stuff. Like, was it the Dabbies, Thunderstruck and Duraliner Giant stuff ran
Hmm.
big crazy tires for a while, and even the barefoot trucks ran them
Oh
back
yeah.
in the day. But still, I can't imagine dealing with that. And then, like you said, the logger tires that like Megaforce or even Gigantic Orange Crush ran, I couldn't imagine dealing with that on a
No.
weekly basis. Are you kidding me?
Dude, that'd be, I mean, we all bitch when, they're like, hey, promoter needs you to do, you've got this call. I know I've got this call. We both have, but think back to your days when you were driving the rig for Monster Jam or I'm running for Foot or whatever. And, you got to do a show in El Paso and you're thinking, all right, cool, man. I'm going to roll in Thursday night. I'll dump the
Mhm.
trailer at the arena and bobtail the hotel. And then you get that call on Wednesday while you're relaxing by the pool in Kingman, Arizona at the Best Western. Hey
Mhm.
man, you need to pack up and haul ass over to El Paso. They want you to do a display, the day before the show, and you're like, ah shit.
Oh,
So, you
God.
pack up and you haul ass to El Paso, and then you find out there's no wide load available. So like monster
Mhm.
truck guys, we like to bitch and cry if we have to tire up, more times than we feel is necessary in the course of a weekend. So and we whine because we have 66s, but man, I think back, like we had a 73 laying around at Hall Brothers one year. Somebody had just given it to him or whatever, and it was actually in. Uh, they used to donate tires to the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago for the Pachyderm House, which is like where
Mhm.
the rhinos and stuff.
Mhm.
Tim Hall and his significant other Vicky, they were huge supporters. I'm sure they probably still are of the Pachyderm house there. But anyways, stuff like worn out monster truck tires are great enrichment toys for pachyderms like rhinos. So anyhow, somebody gave us like 4 or 5 random ass big tires, and one of them was a Goodyear 73, and of course no wheel in it. And I remember walking outside the shop one time just looking at this thing, and even deflated, it was taller than, and I'm only 5'10", but it was well taller than me. And I tried
Yeah.
moving that sucker, and I was like, I know it would be easier with a wheel and air in it, but my God, these things had to be exhausting. And back in the
Still, I
day,
mean,
oh, dude, look at guys like, Jeff Dane's hauler setup back in the day. It doesn't look like they had a crane or anything sometimes. So
no.
what are they, hand rolling this shit up on the trailer? Like, not fun.
Yeah, and then also somebody posted the other day. I saw on social media the tire change competition at the Indy Jamboree.
Yes. Kramer posted
And
that. Yep.
out there, yeah, and out there with the pump jack. It's like, are you kidding me? And then, see the guys and Kyle, you've done it enough that you'd see them jack it up and they get the tires off the ground, which is like the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
You want them just barely there. And I was watching Night Stalker guys, and they had that thing all like 2 inches off the ground. I'm like, oh my God, you're setting yourself up for disaster here. But
Well,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, well, on that topic, like you said, was when Steve Combs was doing the tire on Night Stalker there. Of course, they're all split rim, heavy wheels, big honking full cleat or Firestones on that truck. But as well as I do, when you got somebody messing with the jack, whether they're doing a good job or not, you can hear the tone in your impact change. And I heard it in that video when the tire's just in the sweet spot and you hear and you're doing good. But man, when you hear that thing just going and you're like, dude, put that thing up or down or something. Like, you got this thing wrong. This lug is not coming off. And to your
the
point,
same now. It's the same now. Like it's like if you have it a quarter inch too high or a quarter inch too low, you can definitely hear the difference in the tone of the impact.
Yes, definitely. And I don't think I ever had the luxury of an electric jack that had a long enough handle and controller on it, really, that I could, work that thing without having to pop back up, walk around, all that kind of stuff. So there's certainly the, work smarter, not harder thing. But as I've steered us wildly off course, and this is what you get if you just leave Frank and I unattended. Like Mom hasn't fed us supper yet, and we don't even have any beers in us. We're literally just 2 tired guys at the end of 2 long days, and now we're bench racing. But I joked before we started recording with Frank, I was like, he's like one of my best friends that I've never gotten to sit and have a bunch of beers with. And I said we could drain a brewery dry and run off all the patrons, spending 8 hours just talking IndyCar and monsters. But anyhow, back to the USA thing. So yeah, they kind of had that core niche group of trucks in the 80s, and then that evolved as time went on, like you said, to Dan Patrick coming on, did a few shows as the Red Samson in 89 before becoming the Keystone, one of the 2 Keystone trucks, Coors Extra Gold, and then later Keystone. I gotta get my shit right on that. I'm supposed to know these things. But then also Bigfoot was they had enough trucks by that time. They were certainly a fixture at those events. I think about, coming in probably around 91, 92, Troublemaker from here in Wyoming, which is pretty rad, out of Green River, Wyoming. Not a deep, rich history of monster trucks being operated out of Wyoming. So, Troublemaker kind of has a special spot in my heart, let's say. I didn't even know where Wyoming was at and that I was going to eventually live there the first time I saw Troublemaker in Kansas City. One of our mutual favorite trucks, Rob Morris, 4-wheel crazy. He certainly had plenty of airtime on US Hot Rod late, in the early 90s, but I think some of the best driving Rob did was at the shows I saw him at USA.
Yeah, and I was lucky enough to do in my early time being around Scott Stevens, I was able to see Troublemaker in person at the Richfield Coliseum in Cleveland, Ohio, which I'm telling you what, man, Mike Peterson, he ran his ass off. That truck was sweet. It was that mid-range race truck. It had the tube chassis, the whole 9 yards, but he still had leaf springs, but he had that one nitrogen shock per corner. Kind of, it was very Excalibur-esque.
Yeah.
The way he had that last truck that he had. But yeah, man. And Rob Morris, that truck, Kyle, we could go on and on. We could spend a day talking about 4-wheel crazy. That truck, to me, I think now if it was in its last, configuration, could go run now
Oh yeah.
somewhere.
That thing
Completely
was
convinced.
fast. I mean, that thing
It
probably
was.
weighs less than a fully decked CRD truck weighs now.
It had to, the way it got around, and a couple of those, the USA shows you're talking about that are documented that you've seen four wheel crazy in. That thing got around the turn for as long as it was. It looked heavy, but I don't think it was.
No, I don't think it was real heavy. I mean, I'd love to, I guess, see it compared next to Bigfoot 10, let's say, and compare wheelbases. It might look longer than it really is because it is a Ranger body and not a,
Mhm.
F-150,
Yeah,
250 body.
yeah.
So it may not have as much wheelbase as what we think. But what I will point out, and I'm curious to see your opinion on it, I have no information on this, pure speculation. But there was a couple trucks in that era. I think about Ecology Eliminator, and some of the other Golden State trucks, and certainly Four Wheel Crazy. Their rear steering was quick, almost like they were
It
running a
was.
24-volt setup or some kind of really hot pump, like a big pump or a speedy pump. Like, I don't know what your thought is on that, but you look at, and I'm dropping the footage in now, you look at the Kansas City Arrowhead 92 footage on the turning course, and Rob Morris's rear steering hauls ass.
Well, Kyle, and you know about this. I think the one caveat to all this is that they were probably running opens front and rear.
Yeah.
So if they had the open in the rear steer is going to 100% be faster. That's
Yeah.
about the only thing I could. I'm probably speaking out of turn. They may have been running the lockers in there back in the day, but I'm guessing not. So if they were opens front and rear, the rear steer is going to be super quick.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Honestly, I didn't think of that because I just think, I mean, it seemed to me like a lot of guys were running lockers in the rear back then, but maybe not. Either way, um, credit
Still,
to them. I mean, it still was fast, man. I mean, you had to have fast hands to catch that truck
yeah.
around the corner because it was turning on a dime. I've never driven with an open rear differential, at least not intentionally. That'd make
Hmm.
me a little bit nervous, but that would be pretty wild just scooting around those turns. And I guess that's kind of a cool segue to talking about the sort of tracks that USA built back then. And I think it's right out of the gate, I think it's a fair assessment to say that monster trucks, the track for them, did not become super important to USA probably till about the 89 season. Now, granted, there's not a lot of footage out there from, I mean, there's just not enough footage out there, period, I don't think, for USA. But you don't start seeing like hills made with dumpsters or hills in the turns or anything too crazy or complex for the monster truck layout. But if you look at our medium raw 87 Arrowhead show. The first night is a straight drag, right down the pulling lane, hook a U-turn, two sets of cars, you're done. The second day at Arrowhead was actually multiple sets of cars and just running in a circle timed event. So not a lot of complexity there, no ramps or anything fancy. But by the time we get to 90, 91, 92, they're running, multi-jump turning courses, kind of their signature. I feel like if you were going to run a big USA turning course was jump a big set of cars, turn, hit a small set of cars, hit a dirt ramp, turn again, finish over the big set of cars. And so obviously the monster truck course then was taking priority over the rest of the show, which kind of reflected the way the entire, this whole sport, and I'm saying that including mud bogging and tractor pulling and all those things that were in, I call it an ecosystem, all the things that were in that indoor dirt motorsport ecosystem at the time, monster trucks rose to the top in terms of priority for building the track, and everything else kind of had to flow around that. Um, Looking at those tracks, Frank, and I know I'm rambling here just a sec, but in addition to some of the uniqueness USA brought with their track designs, I mean, US Hot Rod wasn't building tracks in 1989 with, dumpsters or shipping containers with ramps built up over them and all that. And yes, I know USA was using them for Stadium Cross and all that during the show as well. Never mind that. They were making the monsters do things that maybe they didn't normally do. And then you look into the 90s when the trucks start running more of these, purpose-built turning courses that did not have shared obstacles for other classes, I guess is a way of putting it. We talk about this St. Louis style as we know it from like Monster Jam racing or whatever, and I don't know who invented it. It shouldn't be called St. Louis style.
Mhm.
That's just what all of us, internet kids dubbed it in the late 90s because of that one TNN show. But in St. Louis style, and I'll put video on here to illustrate this, you've got the trucks running identical tracks, but at the first turn they turn away from each other, and then they race down the second straight, and then they turn back towards each other and then finish where they started. With USA, they did run those outlines for a while, or layouts I should say, but then they gravitated to what I have just dubbed, because I'm a homer, Kansas City style, which is the same course, but then the course is actually built as a mirror image for both lanes, and then the trucks both, hook the same left turn, for both of their turns. So the trucks are turning, it perceives to the crowd the same direction in those turns. Again, that 92 Arrowhead show is a great example of that. And what's funny is you see that sort of track layout appear again through the 90s at different seemingly random events, including the four-wheel jamboree series after the Penda days. You think about like Indy and Anderson, South Carolina, there's footage from both of those where you get the trucks turning the same way. Well, that could have something to do with the fact that Greg Fuchs went to work for, special events, the Jamboree series, after spending a great deal of time at USA building tracks and laying tracks out. So I don't know if Greg's kind of the catalyst behind that, but he certainly took that idea with him. So now, as I finish my ramble selfishly here, Frank, I want to talk about that. What do you think is more fair, and which would you prefer? Let's say, traditional style St. Louis, where you're turning away from each other and then back towards each other, or do you think it's more fair for competition that everybody's making lefts or everybody's making rights on the same layout?
I mean, for me as a driver, it really doesn't matter. And Kyle, as being a driver too, you always want to turn to the left because it's easier to see up that hole. So if you have to turn to the right, it's always a little bit of a guessing game.
Hey everybody, what's up? It's KD, just kind of jumping in the middle of the show here. Wanted to help illustrate the point Frank's making about, in monster trucks, why we kind of like to turn left more than right, and sort of the hole in the left side that he's talking about. So of course, I've pulled a couple old GoPro clips of mine out from Bakersfield and Stockton back when I was driving Bigfoot's number 10, and then the following year Bigfoot number 14. So it's not the greatest angle, but you'll kind of get the idea. If you look on the right-hand side of my driving position there on the other side of the steering wheel, you can barely see that right front tire through the floor Lexan in that fender gap. But there's a lot of wiring over there. There's, all the gauges, most of the instrument cluster. You've got your shifter down there and things like that. So your visibility is a bit more limited on the right-hand side for the way most trucks are built. Now you look on the left-hand side here, you can very clearly see you've got a great shot down to the tire through the floor, and you can have a pretty good look at what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here on this one and get it started and kind of explain to you what's going on. So we're staged here. We're racing Chicago style. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but typically Chicago style racing, you're turning left. That seems to be the preferred way that promoters and everybody builds the tracks. Well, this year at Monster X in Bakersfield, they had us racing, clockwise, right-hand turns. So I think I'm racing El Perro Loco in Rod Wood here in the final, Chicago style with dasher boards up, rookie driver, old truck, wore out sway bars, all the excuses for you here. But I squeak out a little bit of a win here, and you can see it's just kind of a messy run. Now, fast forward the next year, about a year later, almost exactly, we're racing in Stockton, California, kind of doing a outside to inside Chicago style. Look through the floor there, man. I can cut it really close to that sign marker they were using as sort of a turn marker. I mean, shaving it really close right there. At least that's how it looks from the onboard. And was able to squeak out a win there. And, you can attack the turns a lot more aggressively when you've got that visibility down through the floor and you can just see what's going on down there on the left side. And any monster truck driver, without even thinking about it, is probably going to drive through the floor off the left-hand side, primarily without even thinking about it, just because that's where the visibility is best. So thanks for checking those out. Just wanted to help Frank illustrate his point a little bit there.
Because you can't judge as well turning the truck right. And also, too, everybody wants to turn left because you drive a passenger car every day and you're sitting on the left side of it. It's just easier to turn the thing left.
It just
feels
in a monster
normal.
Truck, yeah,
it does. But in a monster truck, as you know, you can see way more out that left side. So you can watch that left front tire, and you can gauge yourself off the turn car or the pole a little bit easier if you're turning left. To me, back then though, watching as a kid, it didn't matter to me. But nowadays, at my current age, it's like, oh, okay, man, it'd be nice if I think for competition's sake, if everybody's turning the same way, it makes it a little more even for racing. Like if one guy's turning left, one guy's turning right, then it's a little goofy because the other guy turning right has which it may not appear to the outside that someone's got an advantage, but it is a definite advantage for the guy turning left. So
Totally.
I don't know. I mean, either, and then also too, Kyle, something we never even brought up earlier as far as these tracks. In this era, this was way before auto center, like
Oh yeah.
auto center for the rear steer. These
Yeah.
guys were doing it by hand or by some mechanical apparatus they would put on their rear steer cylinders.
Mhm.
So that's another thing that growing up never paid attention to, never cared about. And a lot of, not even USA, but all the USHRA stuff, these guys were doing it all by feel.
Yeah.
And that's something I've only had to do it a couple times, like when the auto center would die.
Mhm.
So then you had to, it's either, all right, I can handle it. So you had to do it all by the feel of that. You just had that seat of the pants feel. So, but those guys were doing it every single night. And I think that's a subject that needs to be brought up more, because that's super hard to do if, we grew up in the auto center era. So as far as drivers, but
Yeah.
those guys are doing it without auto center, which is super difficult.
That's an excellent point that you make, and especially on those tighter tracks. I mean, if you are running like a sweeping track where you just need to bump a little rear steer in, let's say,
Yeah.
it's a little easier to get that sucker back pretty close to center. But when you got to reach deep into your rear steer reserve and dig everything out so you can make those super tight turns, get her straight as fast as you can. Anybody that's excuse me, and let's go down that path. Anybody, and I've had to do it. I've lost auto center on turning courses. I know you have. And then I, of course, came up driving the ride truck for the hauls, and I don't know if it does now, but it never had auto center on it ever.
Right.
So there was not even an option. So every time I drove that truck, and I drove that truck, I got to drive the ride truck in places that most ride trucks never go, like the Buffalo Chip Campground in Sturgis 2 summers in a row. I mean, that was some insanely tight driving through the campgrounds and the concert grounds and stuff there, just promoting for Dodge, not really like doing monster truck rides. And so you get a really good feel for your rear steering. And I always remember Kramer talking about, having his carburetors sticking out of the hood. And that was like his weather vane to kind of how they looked. He told him where his rear steering was at. And of course, I didn't have that on the ride truck, but I had a big tack up on the dash. So I always kind of imagined that thing was a little bit of a guide for me, but you really just get it from the seat of your pants. And because of all that time spent manually running my rear steering, when I did car crush exhibitions in Raminator or Ramunition, I tended to drive on what they had is kind of what I would call like a semi-automatic setting. So you turn the rear steering, let off the rocker switch, and the steering would stay engaged. But above that was another button you could hold down that would then kind of bring them back to center. So it was like semi-auto. And then at Bigfoot, we had the same thing, but different. On our Hirsch shifters, there was the same kind of rock, and I assume it's probably like how other trucks you might have driven back in the day before the pistol grip thing, which I never drove with. I'd like to. Looks cool. Seems ergonomically very sensible. But on the foot trucks, we had kind of a rocker switch for the rear steering, and there was an automatic setting, totally automatic, to where you push down and hold it, and then when you left the turn, let off, and they'd come back. And that's what we're talking about, auto return to center. But I always drove with the semi-automatic setting on the Bigfoot trucks as well, where I'd hold down the rear steering switch as much as I needed or bump it as I needed it. And sometimes I would bump it back to trim, or what I guess would probably be like a nitrous button if you were a drag racer, the red button on the end of the. Some of them were red, some were black, I think. But regardless, on the end of the shifter, there was a red button you could hold, and you'd push that down. Well, the Bigfoot trucks were always impeccably wired. Like they were, I like to joke as a monster truck, they were wired like a street car. They had everything wired really nicely, and every button and every switch worked really nice. And I don't ever remember having a real electrical problem with a Bigfoot truck, even in water. But anyhow, you'd hold that button down on the shifter, and then that would bring your steering back to center. And Frank, that was really nice because you could kick in all the rear steering you need, and then you could start to bleed that off back to center by just tapping that button as you needed and really get what you wanted from the truck. But buddy, when you lose that shit in the middle of a run and your brain
Oh, yeah.
has to suddenly catch up to like, oh baby, we're in full manual right now. That's not easy. And you think about a guy like Rob Morris that's in a still a leaf spring truck, good working leaf spring truck, but still a
Mhm.
leaf spring truck. So you're getting beat around and then you're getting jostled around and you're probably driving with a switch on the door or something. And you're having to drive that thing back from feel the whole way. I mean, for those of you out there that are listening that have driven monster trucks, just think about it to yourself. It is tough to haul ass, be smooth, and run your rear steering on manual. That might be one of the hardest things in monster trucks to master, at least until you guys all started figuring out this stoppy stuff and everything. But rear
Yeah.
steering's a challenge, buddy. And so that is a great point you make there. Who else do you think about from that era that was just a killer on these USA courses? I think Rob Morris was great. Obviously, the Bigfoot guys were good. Taurus, we got to talk more now about Taurus. Taurus 3, the first stage 3 Taurus, made his debut at a USA show in Kansas City in 1989, as I understand it. I mean, what a revolutionary truck that was. And to get put through the paces straight away with USA, that's pretty cool too.
Well, and what was cool back then is that he was running with a bunch of leaf spring in like that middle, like not leaf spring, not race truck. They were like in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and those trucks were running their butts off, and they were putting Taurus to the test too. That Taurus racer truck had to run hard to beat those guys, and of course he had an encounter with the loader there
Yeah.
in the one video. But
Yep.
man, it's hard to bring up because there's a couple instances of Pablo Huffaker in the Purina mainstay truck
Yep.
with some of those videos, and then Scott Stevens with the Auto Value King Crunch, and so those guys were around that Penda era. Those guys were coming over and running there, and then every now and again, you said old Black and Green Wrecking Machine come through
Oh,
there
yeah.
too. But boy, towards the end of USA, they were really not the end, but in the early '90s, as the race truck thing was progressing, you started seeing all sorts of trucks dipping into USA.
Totally. Their reach really expanded as time went on, and they nourished the careers, or even just you could say they nourished the businesses of teams like the Willmans with Taurus and Fred with Barefoot and Dennis with Diggers. And even if Dennis didn't run a ton of USA all the time, or most of the time, or any of the time, however you want to cut it, you think about as I understand it, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, but we talked a little bit about the lineage of the Coors Extra Gold Top Dog, which owes its DNA to that first long wheelbase King Crunch truck, and then it gets improved and modified and becomes, I guess you kind of go from the orange, black, red King Crunch to then that blue and black livery we see in the '87 Arrowhead video, and then it goes on to being the Extra Gold Top Dog. But when the demand for Gravedigger was such in the 90-91 era, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
USA, I think, facilitated the sale, if not of that complete truck, but parts of it at least, axles, I think, maybe some springs, different things. And Dennis had his hands in it. I think Jack Caberna might have had his hands in it. But basically, there's old King Crunch / Top Dog parts that made it into one of the Gravedigger trucks, and that truck was leaned on very heavily by USA to kind of be their digger truck. Because
Yeah.
Dennis was doing a ton of business with US Hot Rod, of course. So the demand was there for that extra digger truck, and they helped bring about. And that's why we need to have Chris Mormanis on, because boy, does that guy know his lineage of those old digger trucks, especially the oddballs like 4 and 5 and things like that. I'm your Bigfoot guy, not your Gravedigger guy. Sorry. Uh,
Yeah.
so, and they were running a lot of West Coast shows at that point. I mean, Golden State and USA teamed up on things. Dave Matthews with ZZYZX, Zizix, however you want to say it. I mean, they partnered on some stuff for a long time, as I understand it, with USA. So their reach was pretty far and wide. I mean, they did Hartford, Connecticut, and they did Salinas, California. I mean, they ran a lot into Canada. I mean, if you were kids our age in the late 80s, early 90s, and you were in places like Edmonton and Winnipeg and Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, and you got to see monster trucks, well, you probably had USA to thank for a lot of that. Calgary, is another one. Lethbridge, I think they even ran some shows. So I think that's such a big deal that they were taking monster trucks so international, which probably brings us to another good segue, Frank, is the international angle with USA, particularly the Australia tour, the first one they did in '89. What a treat that was hearing Dave Bennett kind of tell us some stories from those Australia trips.
Absolutely. Oh, by the way, jumping back to that Gravedigger truck you were
Yeah.
speaking about.
Sorry. Yeah.
That truck was, so it was parts of the Chorus Extra Gold Top Dog. But Jack Coburna, that was Jack Coburna's truck.
Okay.
And he and Dennis had a deal and had the Firestones on it, which came off of the Top Dog. It ran Clark Planetary. But that was basically strictly USA West Coast Gravedigger. Because Dennis, this whole tenure, he was a East Coast guy. He'd run all over the country, but he didn't have enough trucks at the time to do it. And just like a standard Dennis move, that was super genius to get a guy like Jack Coburna in that period was outstanding, right? So, sure, let's have Jack put this truck together and let's run it out for USA. I mean, it made total sense and was a great idea. The truck ran strong. It's a very key part in a lot of those USA Motorsports home videos.
Definitely. No, I'm glad you took us back to that. We'll jump back to the Australia thing here in a second, but might, if we're talking about secondary, ancillary, or whatever second channel Gravedigger trucks, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean like not Dennis and whatever he's doing. You talk briefly about Pablo with the Purina mainstay just showing off. I mean, Pablo went from the King Crunch partnership with Scott, but in a much friendlier way than the Taurus Barefoot thing happened. He kind of branches off to do the just showing off thing, and then builds his first tube chassis truck. Gets some Purina dog food sponsorship, the mainstay Purina dog food, which is crazy, right? Like that seems like the most
random.
Yeah, totally random. But it was a beautiful truck. Like it looked like a race car. That was a cool looking sponsor. But that thing was not around super long. He had the deal on the leaf spring truck for a short while, and then it moved over to the Stage 3 truck. But it was not around for a whole long time before that truck, and Pablo were recruited by Dennis to become a Gravedigger operation as well. So I think you can point to, in the case of Coburna's deal and then Pablo's deal, growth for Gravedigger did come out of the USA days and the partnerships that he started to form. And then also, you kind of think about those guys were running their equipment probably pretty smart too. I mean, Dennis was getting pretty wild and tearing shit up on TV and all that kind of stuff, where, Pablo was essentially still a privateer. Jack and other guys were kind of running like privateers. And so they were probably doing a pretty good job of maybe running on budget a little better than sometimes Dennis was. You talk about, though, we'll circle back to Australia now, and Dave Bennett told us the story of, Lyle Hancock driving those early expansion teams for Gravedigger and going to Australia with USA, but being hard on the loud pedal and breaking shit and blowing motors. And I think about, the kind of parts budget that those guys were eating up being deployed down there to Australia with USA, but what a groundbreaking thing for USA to go down there and partner with Michael Edgley Productions and bring real top shelf in the flesh American monster trucks to the Aussies and the Kiwis.
Oh, for sure. I mean, at that time, monster trucks. I mean, that was a United States thing. That was over here kind of thing. And then, I mean, other promoters did it, but man, the way USA did it, especially the trucks he took over there, is pretty outstanding.
No, absolutely. And granted, was it the newest Taurus truck? No. Was it the newest Bigfoot truck? No. It wasn't the newest Gravedigger truck, but they were still good, like hard charging trucks, and it was good business for those trucks to be doing too. They're losing their competitive edge maybe here stateside, but hell, they're putting on an outstanding show for the Vienna Boys Choir in
Yeah,
Sydney,
it is.
Australia or
Yeah,
something.
and the trucks didn't need to be. They didn't need to be the top level race truck. It didn't need
No,
to be that for what they were doing. The names were going over there, and I've ran into this in my international experience. They're just so excited to see monster trucks, and it was
certainly.
even in that era just to have the trucks there was pretty sweet. And even the big names, but still, like you said, the trucks they took over there may not have been the most current versions of the trucks, but they still ran their asses off. So which made it pretty sweet.
A saying that I've heard a lot of times, and I have to agree with it as best as I can understand what it might be like. But they say no one understands the American dream like someone that's immigrated to the U.S. and built that dream, for themselves here in the U.S. And I think that probably applies in the inverse a little bit with the monster truck thing. Is some of us can be a little cynical or a little spoiled or a little jaded if we got a
Yeah.
childhood packed full of cool monster truck shows, but I would say no one in 1991 appreciated Bigfoot 2 smashing some cars as much as an Australian kid that was seeing Bigfoot of any kind or monster trucks live of any kind for the first time. So, you think back to one of our Jim Cramer episodes when I was, lamenting about as a kid how sad I was at Kemper Arena in early 92, thinking Bigfoot 9's going to be here. Bigfoot 8's going to be here. No, it's poor Jim Cramer's getting thrown to the wolves with Bigfoot 3.
Yeah.
Whereas that same year, some kid in Brisbane, Australia might have been tickled effing pink to see two or three come down there and smash some cars. So it's all about that perspective, right? And so USA didn't book the three or four cheapest monster trucks they could find in the US and ship them to Australia. They brought three or four of the hardest working, most reliable, best established teams that they could spend their money on. And that comes back to our first point we talked about at the start of the show was consistency, quality and consistency, hallmarks of USA, I think, all the way through their shows.
Well, yeah, even when you start getting into the middle of the '90s and even late '90s, and we talked about this, with Dan Patrick on occasion. Um, his Keystone truck and that turned into American Gladiator, then Samson again. He was a pioneer of the sport, but his truck was the last one to become a two
Right.
capacity race, which says volumes about Dan, in my opinion. That
Yeah.
he was so concerned on pushing Bigfoot to the forefront and pushing his customers to the forefront. He was the last one in line to build a tube chassis, and it goes back to what we were talking about. That certain era, there was a lot of guys that had the equipment and were running so much. And see, that's another thing we haven't talked about yet, Kyle, is that some of these guys are running so much they didn't have time to build
Yeah.
a race truck. And then that's where Dan came in for a lot of these independents too. So, but no, going back to the whole thing, it's like it's really impressive to see what USA did, and if there is like a timetable or just if you like we're in school and you
Yeah.
see on
Timeline.
the yeah there is no other. I mean, US Outright obviously, but the USA timeline, as short as it may have been, which really wasn't that short, it ended around 98, 99, but the progression and of monster trucks and the development that you saw from 88 to 98 was amazing.
Truly, it was. And I mean, I think of USA in a formal capacity from like 84 to 90, call it end of
Yes.
97, early 98. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there you're looking at, a decade and a half of full on operating time. But when monster trucks in this form of entertainment, this ecosystem, as I call it, had only been around for 20 years and USA had been around for 15 of those, let's, call it, that
Yeah.
that is huge when a promoter that's basically been around since the start gets consumed by another one. Where TNT had only been around, let's say, for half that time before they got consumed. But now, of course, we're looking at 50 some odd years of history for the sport. So USA's slice of that pie is smaller by the year, but its impact at the time can't be, misunderstood or underrepresented because I mean, so let's talk about the 90s in USA, right? I would say the 90s is certainly where maybe some of their pushing of the limits or boundaries or creativity starts to maybe stall, but I guess stall would imply on accident or through laziness. And I don't think that's what it was. I think for them, they were trying to deliver that quality, repeatable experience to the customers, that was dependable and reliable. But I also think they realized that what they could pay the teams and the other kinds of entertainment at their shows, that rate of pay was dropping off from the 80s. Not everything was an easy, license to print money every weekend we do a show thing like it seemed it was through so much of the 80s. Wallets tightened, budgets tightened, operating costs went up. So I think they were trying to maintain some kind of a balance in this ecosystem where we're going to pay the truck owners good, fair pay. Maybe not always as much as what, US Hot Rod pays, but we're going to pay better than pretty much everybody else. But when you come to our shows, we're going to treat you nicely. You're part of the family. We want you to run strong, but you don't necessarily have to run on kill, hardly ever. If you choose to run that way, we'll see how it works. We'll see if we keep booking you if we have to flip you over every weekend back on your wheels or you do building damage type thing. But they also tailored their tracks to not murder the trucks either. Long ramps, buried cars. I mean, just fun, easygoing quality shows. I mean, in some respects, and I say all these things positively, Frank, in some respects, it's kind of what Hot Wheels does with you guys now, where it's a good, fun, repeatable thing that's meant to entertain families for a couple hours and then get you on your way home.
Absolutely. And also, Kyle, another aspect of the 90s USA stuff, that was an era, like I'd say 90, when Bigfoot 8 and Taurus were like the head of the game kind of guys, right? So once that happened, other trucks started to progress. And I think kind of what went on here is that the trucks kind of outgrew the tracks pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I think they were still building the track that they were building in 88, 89, but the trucks were adapting so fast and turning into something much more advanced than they were just like a year earlier.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of one of the things that may have hurt them, but I mean, it wasn't their fault. I mean, nobody knew at the time what the trucks could do or would do until they actually did it, and then it goes back to what you were saying too. It's like the technology and everything got going so quick and you also do what we don't even think about this. These guys were learning to drive these trucks on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I don't think we've ever brought up is that, a guy like Gary Porter, who has another USA guy, Wiggins and Porter, a lot of USA stuff. So you got to think those guys went from 15, 18,000 pound leaf spring trucks to where, Porter builds these 10, 9,000 pound race trucks. He's trying to figure out how to drive it on the fly, but he's doing these big shows for USA and for US Hot Rod. So there's a.
Uh-oh. This is funny. We'll let Frank back in when he tries to re-enter here in a second. For those at home wondering, I griped at Frank and Looker and told them they needed to have headphones so their audio was better, and I think Frank might have just bumped the end call button.
Sorry, buddy.
You got to watch rubbing your ear. You'll hit the end call button.
I know. Sorry about that, man.
That's okay. Now shake your phone.
I know. I got to rotate it. Well, these stupid earbuds, they keep wanting to fall out. So
you'll have to play around. Hopefully, they give you different tips to put on.
They did. I guess they have a small ear hole.
You're only supposed to put just the tip in, though. Don't put the entire thing in.
The entire thing is in
all
there
the way, all the way, all 0.75 inches.
Yes.
Very good.
Sorry,
it wouldn't be a bottom dead center show if we didn't do. Yeah, we gotta crash and burn at some point during this show. So
we're doing way too good.
Yes, the only thing we've done 100% correctly is to not be correct every time. So that's great.
Right.
No, I agree. They're learning to drive the trucks. Through the 90s, I think things are a little more predictable for everybody. I mean, Deal Wilson's got his Patrick chassis. Patrick's in his own, stage 3 stuff. The Bigfoot trucks are running. David Morris with Equalizer was such a force on those. But touching back in time, one more shot here. You think about when those early stage 3 trucks arrived, like Taurus 3 and then Bigfoot 8 and Bigfoot 9. And Kramer actually spent a lot of time running USA shows in 90. And that's where Bigfoot 9 kind of exposed itself for what it could do and where it was vulnerable or weak as well. And what's kind of neat is USA didn't immediately just start throwing long dirt ramps on everything and making it easy for these lightweight trucks and making it harder for the leaf spring trucks to actually keep up. And I don't know if this was by design or just kind of how it shook out, but like the 89 Arrowhead show, I look as an example, even the 1990 Arrowhead show, there were no dirt ramps on the cars at all in 89. And I remember as a kid being at one of the shows and Taurus 3 is just struggling because like Patrick, or Brett Engelman, Heartbeat, those guys can run wide open at these cars, these freestanding sets of cars, and just send it. Now there could be consequences on landing, and that's for another time. But the Taurus
Yep.
truck was too light, it was too agile, it was too overpowered to where it actually could not just blast through the cars, and it broke shocks that weekend, and they lost the bedsides at one point, and it never ended up actually dominating or winning a show that weekend. And then you look at 1990, Kramer's in Bigfoot 9 at Arrowhead, and you're seeing some of the footage in the episode here. While the main jump of cars, let's say in the center of the track, had a long dirt ramp, the set of cars you had to hit, the smaller one after the turn, was just 3 cars in a 3 stack freestanding. And you look, Kramer struggled with some of that stuff, just getting over as fast as maybe the leaf spring trucks could, that were more apt to just sort of drive through them versus. I mean, man, you take like a 9,000 pound Taurus or Bigfoot 9 and you put a fresh set of cars in front of those trucks, they are going up well before they go out on that stuff. And they're both running lightweight axles at the time. Obviously, the Taurus trucks and some of their DNA progeny that spun off of them kept those lightweight ZFs that they ran with improvements. But Bigfoot completely abandoned the Carrero axle program under Bigfoot 9 because it just could not hold up to some of the stuff. I mean, it's great. I would have loved to have seen Bigfoot 9 run TNT shows. I think it would have outpaced number 8. It would have handled better than number 8. It was faster than anything on the planet, monster truck wise at the time, or at least as fast as anything else. But that wasn't the case. They didn't run it over there. But its axles maybe could have got it through a whole weekend of TNT racing with, long jumps and long ramps and stuff. And then they could have gone to a Ford dealer the next weekend and broke a spindle crushing cars iron wall in it. So
Yeah.
USA, at least in that 89-90 realm, certainly kept the new style trucks honest, not by banning them, TNT, but by making them work harder against the old trucks and giving the old trucks an opportunity to still have some parity on the field, I guess, by not everything being totally, highway on ramp smooth.
Yeah, that's such a cool era when you saw these race trucks coming in. Then they're still racing against like Nightmare and Heartbeat and all these big, heavy leaf spring trucks that were still hanging in there. And also, a lot of those trucks had a ton of power to make up for the suspension disadvantage that they were at. So it was cool watching. And I know you and I, all of us here, have talked about that little window where the race trucks were coming in, but there was some leaf spring trucks that were they went on a diet and trimmed down and tried to turn a leaf spring truck into a race truck. So that little span of time, I think, is one of the coolest eras of monster trucks, and USA was right there for it all.
Yeah. I mean, if you had to pick a lineup for a show in 1991 or 92 that did not have a Bigfoot 8, a Bigfoot 9, a tube chassis, Gravedigger, any of that, if it was all these hybrid stage 2.5 trucks, let's call them, dude, that would be such a fun show. Like Excalibur and Troublemaker and Four Wheel Crazy and First Blood and Invader, like all these dudes that are trying to like hack their front ends apart and do front 4-link leaf spring hybrid setups. I mean, throw Bigfoot 4 in the mix just for fun. Like, I mean, how fun would that be? A show where every truck had leaf springs, every truck had some kind of tube chassis add-on or component or variation, and then you've got Bigfoot 4 out there stonking around with front 4 links and headers through the hood and just it would be pure bedlam. I mean, absolute mayhem, and I would be there for it. And put them on a big track. I want to see it.
Yeah, and it would be. And remember, Kyle, back then too, guys, you could tell when guys were getting serious is when they would cut either take the bed out and just have fiberglass bedsides, or they would cut the steel bed out and still have the steel bedsides.
Yeah,
You can tell that's when guys were starting to think, or
yeah,
they'd have the hood. The hood would be fiberglass, and the bedsides would be either just the shell, or you could tell that's when guys were starting to go, okay, I got to do something. I can't build a
yeah.
new truck right now, but I'm going to try to do all I can to get this truck remotely as racy as possible.
That was the era of the door slammer monster truck. I mean, it was like a pro stock car in the 70s or early 80s where, yeah, there's definitely a shell of a factory vehicle, but they've hollered that thing
Yep.
out to, it's the equivalent of tubbing and caging, a road
Yeah.
car into a pro street or something. But anyhow, as we start to wrap up here, I think we'll talk about kind of how things wrapped up for USA, and Dave Bennett did a really good job of detailing that for us. And our Dan Patrick episode, which will air later on in the season after this one, Dan talks, from his point of view about how things ended with USA. It's wild to think, Frank, could USA have continued to survive? And it pains me to say this, but without keeping up with the sharp curve of evolution that Monster Jam really went through at the end of the
Mhm.
90s and into the 2000s. I mean, Monster Jam shoved everything that a monster truck could and couldn't do, shoved it into this whole new realm and forced the sport to evolve in so many different ways. And, could USA have still existed? It might have been able to, but it would have been really tough with the growth that Monster Jam had behind it because of its parent companies that, were these huge entertainment companies, from Pace to then SFX to Live Nation and Clear Channel and Feld. And I just don't know if USA would have been able to have been that player that did Minneapolis once a year and did Indy once a year and did all these other, potential stadium dates. I don't know if they could have held on to that, and they would have had to evolve into something a little bit smaller and leaner and meaner that maybe didn't play some of those big stadiums. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, that what if.
Well, I mean, for what USA did when they did it, can't take anything away from them, obviously, right? But it just seems like the evolution and the way things were going and the support that Monster Jam or USHRA had at the time as its evolution happened, as absorbing TNT and then all that kind of stuff as that grew, because they absorbed all those trucks, so they were kind of ahead of the game. But still, USA was still trucking along for a long time
Yeah.
until obviously being consumed by USHRA slash Monster Jam, however you want to break it down. But I think they could have survived, but it may not have been. It wouldn't have been at the same level of a Monster Jam kind of deal. But I think they definitely could have survived. But it would have been a whole different kind of thing.
I think the ownership at USA, this was always just a business opportunity for them more than it was like a passion project type thing, or,
Yes.
something like the Monster Jam thing where it got so big so fast as US Hot Rod before that, that it just
Yeah.
sort of had its own, steam
Yeah.
behind it because it was just so big, and it was just
Right.
that inevitability
Exactly.
that it was going to stick around. With USA, I mean, that they were such a small USA Motorsports was such a small part of the overall package and picture with the sellout, and even US Hot Rod and the Monster Jam property. I mean, I think when Feld bought it, I would just guess from my ignorant viewpoint, not knowing all the details, but I would say that was the biggest acquisition of the US Hot Rod Monster Jam brand, when that was the biggest they were on the table as a piece of a deal,
Mhm.
right? Where in the past, like I think Feld's purchase of Monster Jam was very intentional because that's what they wanted was Monster Jam, versus some of these other transactions where the motorsports piece was just one of the smaller chips on the table, and they were looking at bigger things like venues and concert promotion and other sorts of things like that. So I will say I think the Feld buyout was a very specific. We want Monster Jam. Monster Jam's going to be part of this company's DNA, and that's what we do. So the USA thing, we make a big deal of it because it was a big deal to us as monster truck fans, or the teams that were a part of it make a big deal out of it. But I think in the big scheme of things, it, the people that were doing the buying and selling, it was not as much of a thing to them. I think today there's elements of the Hot Wheels tour, and definitely with Toughest Monster Truck Tour and Brian Manson and Kelly Hess Goldman's property there. I think that a lot of DNA, whether people even consciously realize it or not, USA's way of doing things lives on through some of those properties. And I think the same probably could be said for something like Monster Truck Throwdown or All-Star Monster Truck Tour. I think there is some DNA that's been carried along by design or not, I don't know. But I like to believe that in the back of everybody's minds, kind of the way USA did things trickles down still through history to some of those properties. I certainly know it does with Brian, because Brian, understands a lot about how USA did things, and he went to those shows as a kid and that sort of thing. So whether or not it could have continued to exist is, we'll never know for sure, of course, but I do think some of the ethos lives on, into shows we see today. But I challenge Brian or Elliot or one of these guys that have their own tours to give me that Kansas City style circle track racing again, man. I want to see two trucks turning the same damn direction, because to me, there's nothing that looks cooler than two trucks pitching it into the turn the same direction at the same time, hauling ass into the turn, diving down in there, digging deep, roaring out of there together. And honestly, I think it makes for a better package for the fans to view too, because to me, if you're just a casual fan at the show, it's not that St. Louis style should be confusing to anybody, but I'm sure it can be. Chicago style certainly probably is a little confusing. Hell, Chicago, you know this, Frank. Try explaining Chicago style racing to somebody that's not a monster truck fan. That can be difficult. Where Kansas City style, man, that's easy for everybody to digest. I can see both trucks have the same kind of track and they're running them. And it's very easy to see who's ahead, who's behind. And it makes it fun when there's lead changes. I mean, it might have even been one of the races with Scott Stevens from that Arrowhead show. I'll drop it in the show here. I'll look it up. But there's like 5 or 6 lead changes in one pass. Like, that is really exciting racing to me.
It really is. And just like what you were saying earlier, it's like, what better way to make it simple? If you do the St. Louis style, it's real easy to see who's ahead and who's not. They're running identical tracks. So why not? I like it. So I'll look and see if I can have any input on anything down the road.
There you go.
As far as stadiums go, to see if we can interject a little OSMT into something on the side door.
Yeah, well, you think about like that '99 St. Louis US Hot Rod show, though, that pre-World Finals, World Finals, whatever. It's such an awesome track. I was talking to Matt Stoltz about that the other day. I freaking love that track design. The only downfall of that track is when the trucks turn away from each other in turn one, they're at total opposite sides of the stadium from each other. And I think that's a bummer, because that's hard to get both trucks in the picture together. It's a little harder to judge who's ahead, who's behind, and the trucks are so far apart. Monster trucks really shine. Think about the MLMT races when they ran that big Z course, I think at Kentucky. Monster trucks really shine when they're doing cool shit really close to each other. The farther apart they get, it can take a little of that drama away, versus when they are right next to each other doing cool shit, or at least very much in the same photo frame together. I think it gives you, much more of an opportunity to appreciate the battle that's going on. And hey, man, as well as I do, it's pretty wild when you're racing a monster truck and there's one right there.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
when there's one right there, you're just like, oh, shit, this is real, Whether it's in a hockey arena or a stadium or whatever, it changes a driver's mindset too. So I don't know. I like where your head's at. So, let me know if you make any progress. If I need to put on a suit and tie and make a pitch to somebody for why they need to build tracks like this, you just let your boy know. We'll do it. So... Well, listen, this has been a really great, kind of a quick, shorter episode of Bottom Dead Center, but we're enjoying making some of these more digestible pieces for everybody out there. We can ramble and ramble and ramble, and we love doing it. And like we always remind you, if you don't like it, let us know. We'll refund your membership dues. But we wanted to just have a little fun tonight. Matt Looker was supposed to join us, but as we've chronicled, Matt works in pretty important healthcare role out there in Albany, and hey, work called tonight, and we get that, man. People need help that way more than they need to hear all three of us ramble about USA. But we covered some bases for Matt tonight. We'll get his opinion in a future episode about USA as far as from a promoter and track building angle, because Matt brings such good insight to the show for us, from that. But Frank, we got a lot ahead still here this season on OSMT, both on the bottom dead center side and on like the medium raw, show footage side. But let's give everybody a quick like 30-second peek onto how amazing our interview with Dan Patrick was, and how I think fans are going to see Dan in such a comfortable, fun-loving, natural interview environment that maybe most people have never seen him in.
Well, Dan is one of those guys, and Kyle, obviously being in the business as long as you have, Dan's a name you hear a lot, but you don't hear a lot from him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our interview with him is going to bring Dan Patrick a little closer to the window, if that makes any sense, because he's such an influential and such an important part of everything we talk about. Like, there's a lot of Monster Jam, a lot of Hot Wheels, a lot of all these, the whole industry wouldn't be what it is without Dan Patrick. So to actually put the face with the name that a lot of people mention, PEI or Patrick this, Patrick that, to put the name with the face and the voice with the name and the face is outstanding. And Dan is one of the most likable and personable guys you're ever going to meet, but you just got to get him out of that shell, so to speak. So once you do that, he starts opening up. Story time with Uncle Dan is unbeatable. Unbeatable.
Yeah. You guys should have been there backstage after the show. That's all I can say. No. Dan Patrick to monster trucks is like nitrogen to the atmosphere. Hydrogen and oxygen might get all the notoriety and everybody knows them, but 70% of everything is like nitrogen. It's just there. It's doing its thing, and you'd be screwed without it. And that's kind of how I look at Patrick compared to the monster.
100%.
He's just ever present, omnipresent, whatever, however you want to call it, and just so important, just a pillar since 1988 in the monster truck business, truly. So look out for that. That'll be, coming up later this season. That's going to be great. We got some more USA Motorsports shows that'll be dropping on, medium raw. So we hope you're enjoying the season so far. We're having a blast on the Instagram page with some of the cool content ideas that, we've come up with on there, and getting a lot of fan engagement. We're getting a lot of the OSMT team suggesting cool ideas for content on there. So we're just going to keep trying to do our best. And we're already, what have we lined up? Like 3 or 4 guests already for season 4 later this fall, which we're not going to spoil who they all are. But Frank, we're going to be running the gamut from old hands that were around some of the most legendary trucks in the 80s to some of the young talent driving today that, have that streak of OSMT character in them that we love so much about those old hands. We see it in some of the young guys, and we're going to have a wide variety of folks on, I think, in season 4.
It's going to be great. I mean, obviously, what's behind us has been pretty sweet, and what's ahead is even better. So, and like I said, jumping back to Dan Patrick real quick.
Yeah.
I think every monster truck fan out there, if you know Dan Patrick or you don't, every time you go to a monster truck show, Monster Jam, wherever, you are looking at a piece of Dan Patrick's work out there. It's something on those trucks Dan Patrick touched or built. So just remember that when you see the interview with Dan Patrick, just remember that is the guy who's responsible for the tube chassis era of Bigfoot, part of it, real big part of it, and the evolution of monster trucks to what they are now. Without Dan Patrick, I don't think it wouldn't happen.
I'm not throwing shade here, and I'm speaking out of turn. I know it, but you'd have to be at some kind of 2-bit, halfway hillbilly, not quite real monster truck type of event to find a show that there wasn't something Dan Patrick built or deeply influenced. I mean, it's virtually impossible. Like the show doesn't, even those crazy mega truck guys blasting through the mud and stuff, even if Patrick didn't build some of the parts on them, I guarantee you, man, like as soon as I see a square tube or a round tubing cradle under a truck of a square or a V shape, I'm like, somebody saw a Patrick chassis at some point. So
absolutely.
Well, listen, that's going to do it for us this evening here on Bottom Dead Center. Thank you, Frank, as always, for taking one of your rare nights off between gigs to jump on here with me and shoot the breeze. So yeah, USA Motorsports, baby. It's the topic du jour this season, it seems, on Bottom Dead Center, but we're here for it. So more great stuff coming later this season, but for now we're going to sign off, and we will see you guys in a couple more weeks with our next episode. Cheers.